right, I think we're live board once again, and welcome to this episode number 3 of Subscription Masterclass. Today, once again, we have with us Board.
Hello, Didrik, and hello, the internet, and shout out to Magnus.
And shout out to Magnus. Hope you're here. So today is part 3 of our X-part series of creating subscriptions in Crystallize. So in the previous episode, we have taken a look at different types of subscriptions and modeling and pricing strategies for those. So in this episode, we're thinking, let's go into the actual renewal process after you've captured the customer and they're in the scope of renewing their subscriptions.
Yeah. Totally, I mean, the renewal process and also the sign-up process, we'll talk about how you can manage and orchestrate billing as well as collection, which is, as we know, two sides of the same story. Let's recap a little bit. We discussed a little bit in the first stream about renewal flows, and let's just take a look at a few, and then we'll of course also do it live as usual, because we have different strategies for managing subscription flows. The main ones I would say is prepaid versus post-paid subscription flows. Typical prepaid, Netflix, Spotify, that type of services, where post-paid is often used when you have a little bit more advanced billing strategies. Usage-based billing is often charged end of the period. So as we see here with a post-paid contract, you basically create an order intent from whatever payment service you use and store that payment information in your subscription contract. And this is, as we discussed, the subscription contract in Crystallize is a contract for a future order on an agreed upon price. That's the subscription contract. And in this case, if it's postpaid, you're not charging until the end of the period, right? So here we just have a webhook on Create where you basically just say, thank you for signing up and that you actually have an active subscription. The webhooks here would then be, if it's a Netflix type of service, would be then triggering an authentication and authorization process, right? So that it gives Didrik access to actually use the service. So that's the first one, simple, straightforward, happy path. With prepaid, it's kind of the same. The difference is that once you have the payment token, you're immediately creating an order that you are also immediately typically charging. Now, you can take the initial order and send it also to a collection pipeline, as we will discuss. But typically, you've already authorized and you know that you can charge, so the collection is usually not a risk. But in case where, let's say there is a prepaid contract with invoice payment, for example, that is a different context where you basically want to have an asynchronous collection process, because you send an invoice, you wait 14 days. Is it paid? If it's not paid, you then notify the customer that pay up, basically. So, but if you're doing credit card type of Stripe prepaid, this is the typical flow that you have, where you create a contract. Once a contract is created, you create an order, that is automatically a charged order, as you have already charged as part of this process. Both resulting in the subscription is active, and again, if it's a digital service, that's where you would hook up the authorization so that you have access to the streaming service, the whatever digital service that you have, software app. Yeah. So those are kind of the initial process, right? But one of the good things with a subscription, it's recurring. That's the point. So if we then briefly discuss the renewal process, and this here is one example, because there are different concerns, as I mentioned, with different payment or collection methods. For example, it's not always that it's an API and payment is received or not. It could be an asynchronous, could be manual processes that somebody has to check in account if it's paid. So companies do this differently, but this is an example of I would say a happy path plus renewal process.
Well, the simplest example is maybe you have a credit card that is about to expire. That's a case that you need to take care of down the line. Even though it could have been 4 years of happy path, all of a sudden it's not a happy path anymore.
Yeah, and that's something we haven't taken into account here, where you check, for example, is the credit card about to expire? Notify the user about you should input this so that you will keep the service next month without the interruption, things like that. But basically on renewal, so this is another webhook that you would listen to in Crystallize. Whenever there's a renewal, you can listen to a webhook. So we fire off a signal that goes to your middleware, what we call the service API, where you have your lambdas managing subscriptions. And first of all, you have to check if the subscription is cancelled, because if it's cancelled, you typically end it at the end of the period, and that's the time also when you then fire off, let's say, a signal to the authorization layer that removes direct access to the streaming service, for example. But typically you want it to be active, and then we basically create an order based on the subscription renewal webhook. And what we use in addition here to the initial flows is that we use what we call fulfillment pipelines to manage the subscription flow and the collection process. Essentially, you have an order, and we will show this, but you place it in a stage called charge, right? So it's a renewal. I create an order for Didrik, and then I tell Crystallize, okay, now you have to charge this. So this again fires off a webhook when an order is placed in the stage charge, and that webhook is basically a Lambda service in your middleware, in your service API, where you try to collect the payment based off of the payment information you've already stored, which is part of the contract. That's where you would store your payment tokens. And here it can have two outcomes. You might be able to charge, or it might fail. If you're able to charge, you basically have another stage, success, where you basically just want to fire off an email with a thank you for staying on, and maybe you have the receipt for the payment, for example, things like that. And then, of course, if it fails, you would typically not give up immediately. So you put it in a stage which I typically call retry. And this is where you can then create your dunning process, where you, where you want to try to collect as best as possible, wait 3 days, wait 5 days, etc. If all fails, you might have another stage for failed, where you can have your win back process, the dunning process, where you really want to give them a better and better offer to stay on the platform. That's typically right where you get 2 months for free, or half price for 3 months, things like this. So this is essentially the process. And slides is nice, but let's do it live. That's the way we typically do it. Couple of things. We are going to work with webhooks here. So in this stream, we're not going to do coding. We're going to show the plumbing. We'll get back to actual development in the next stream, where we will be joined by Vasil, and we'll dive into this on the code level. But webhooks are basically events fired from Crystallize. And in this case, this is personally what I like to use, webhook.site, one out of several tools out there that helps you basically to debug and work with the webhooks, because it captures the webhooks and allows you to see the payload and verify that things are actually working. Second tip, once you're connecting this, and we'll get more into this in the next stream, you typically have your code locally, right? You don't deploy it on the internet and then fire off a webhook and see if it works. You typically want to work locally, and then ngrok is another tool that we use a lot, which is basically forwarding your local service API to a public HTTPS endpoint. So it's a tunneling proxy plus tool. Super
Easy
useful.
to use.
Easy to use. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a one-liner. ngrok and you're up.
Exactly.
So that's a tip. But let's consider the first scenario, because we would like to know when a subscription contract is created, right? So we can have a new webhook listener where we basically say subscription contract created. And here with webhook .site debugger here, you're basically able to send this directly to this endpoint. And this is typically where you start before you start coding, right? You want to verify that the plumbing is on the up and up. And what should we listen to here, Didrik? So we have different
Guessing
concerns.
subscription contracts.
And let's do on create here, because here you see you have the events create, update, renew, cancel, or delete. So that's what you basically can listen to, and that's what you would use to orchestrate your billing cycle, the charging process, and also win-back processes. So subscription contract created, firing off to this webhook debugger. And here I'm able also to, with Crystallize, with every webhook in Crystallize, you can choose what the payload should look like. There is a default payload that sends some standard information, but we also have example here where you basically can have subscription contract details, and it just creates a default payload for you. And of course, this being GraphQL, you can choose if you would like to have additional information like metered variables, the product variants, etc., etc. So all of this is fully configurable on the webhook level. Now, this is the plumbing to basically connect a signal from Crystallize that an order is, a subscription contract is created, and to send it to your middleware to do something magic. What we can do here to simulate this is basically to go into a customer and add a subscription contract for our super app that we did earlier. And here you can also enter the, let's say we do the volume-based version here. You can override prices as we discussed before, but essentially now I can create this contract, and essentially what will happen here is that it will fire off an event to your middleware. And this is basically, if we look here at the process, it's basically the event that is happening when you have created your subscription contract. Prepaid or postpaid, you do what works for your strategy. In addition to this, we might want to listen to another event here if we want to basically create an order on this on this webhook. So you send it to the middleware. You create an order based on the pricing that is defined in your subscription contract. So let's see here. Order created. And maybe we will want to copy the webhook URL here. And here you can listen then to order create. And again, you can select the payload where I have order details. And again, you can tune this to send the information you need in your payload. Once I basically create this webhook, we have the listener, where I'm essentially able to go to my, not my orders, but my customer, and say here, we have here my streaming service, for example. And here, if I want to create an order, which is typically what you would do in your middleware, but now for the sake of demoing, we'll do it just using the UI, where it basically creates exactly as we defined, creates an order based off of the values that are defined in your contract for the current period. And what you have in your orchestration layer then is basically, okay, I'm now at the level where I have been able to create a subscription contract based on the subscription contract, either renewal or created. You will have an order created. And the next step is essentially then to orchestrate the order with yet another webhook, where we will listen on the order created and add it to a fulfillment flow. So this is a little bit of setup that we have to do here, because now we have to create a basically a subscription renewal pipeline. And fulfillment pipelines is basically the mechanism in Crystallize to allow you to orchestrate subscription renewal, to orchestrate order management. So this is a collection, it could be fulfillment, depending on the flows you want to manage. And in this case, we're essentially looking at the flow that has a charge, it's got the retry, got a success, and then let's add failed also. So let's do charge. You can choose to automatically place new orders in a pipeline. Makes sense if you have one pipeline and you want every order to be placed there. But often you orchestrate this in your middleware. Charge, and then we had the retry. And then we have we can do failed and success if you want both. Like this. Simple flow. And essentially, you have the same here. So we have the possibility of now going into our webhooks and basically take a look at, okay, we have the subscription contract created, fires off a webhook. Order created, fires off a webhook. Typically you want to fire it to a different endpoint, right? In this case, we're just doing the same because why not? So I'll just copy this endpoint and create another webhook, and we will call this subscription pipeline changed, something like this. And here we're looking at order and pipeline stage change. So that's what we're looking for whenever something is added or removed to a stage. And we can also, again, choose the pipeline details as the blueprint for our webhook. This is the payload, the data that you receive from the webhook. And I can create this. So in essence, now we have these 3 webhooks that just fires off events in Crystallize whenever things change. And in this case, let's do it manually here with, we have the subscription created, the webhook, then you create an order. The order is then placed in Crystallize. And here we have the possibility to just refresh here, to drag it to a pipeline. And also to choose which step in the pipeline it should be placed in. So typically in this case, you want to try to charge. Of course, this is typically done in your middleware. Now we're showing the happy path kind of with using the UI. And the point here is essentially that we do have the payloads that are being sent, where you basically have the subscription contract that is created. We have the order that is created, and we also have the pipeline states that have changed here. So here we have the information about the order and which pipelines it is, and also which stage ID it is in. So that is basically the plumbing. And of course, if you're having an order in charge, this would be sent to your middleware, depending on the payment. If it's Stripe or Klarna or what have you, you will do different calls. And then if it's success, you will move it to the success state. You see you get a webhook fired on that, where you can send an email, or if it's retry, same, it fires off a webhook so that you can listen to these concerns. And that is basically the plumbing, right?
You make it sound so easy.
Simple as that.
And like I explained, but webhook.site is basically where you would point your middleware. So instead of webhook.site, that would be your middleware. And that would listen to all the events in Crystallize, and you handle the events based on what kind of event.
And typically, right now, I just send it to the same endpoint because I just want to debug, just see the payload and verify that that works. Typically, you have one endpoint for created, renewals, all of these stages, right? So that it does one thing. While it, of course, is also possible just to check the payload and have your logic there, but separation of concern and all of those things is typically one middleware service per. It's yeah.
But also why we talked about ngrok, because while you're developing, instead of putting in webhook.site, you put your ngrok HTTPS URL, which funnels down to your local development instead, which makes it a lot easier to work with.
Yeah, definitely. So ngrok is essential for local development, I would say. So, or there's other tools out there, but this is our favorite. So
yeah.
Cool. And that is basically the renewal flow. We showed a little bit of happy paths here. We discussed different payment methods. If you do like we do, for example, we have customers paying on the invoice and we have customers paying with credit card. Those processes are different. So you might have one flow for credit card renewals and one flow for invoice renewals. And that's also the good part here, where you can abstract away this subscription management, also independent of how many payment services you have here. So you can combine like VIPs for the Nordic market, for example, or you have Apple Pay for Europe, and you have invoice for B2B clients and things like this. So it allows you to have one base of all your subscribers, and that you basically are able to orchestrate all the different types of clients with different subscriptions and different payment collection methods in the same service. So that's the I would say, the goal with the setup that we have here in Crystallize. And I think that is the last part that was on my list to show here, where we basically have looked at creating a contract, pre or postpaid, listening to an event and firing that off to your middleware, your service API. Same with the billing process. So you create an order based on the agreed upon values that is in your subscription contract. Listening to that webhook, you push it to a collection pipeline, because creating an order is not the same as a paid order or a collected order, because the payment needs to go through, right? And that's what we use the pipeline stages to orchestrate, where we showed here with a pretty simple setup, where you can have a retry, and that can wait, for example, for 3 days, and then you put it again to charge, and that will trigger, okay, I'm trying to charge again, and then maybe it jumps directly to success, for example, if you're able to do that. So that allows you to manage the subscription renewal process. But of course, as we'll look at in later streams also, it's possible to add a renewal. You have a win back. You can have different types of flows to orchestrate different stages of the subscription lifecycle for your business. So let's end on that. Thanks for watching. We do have another one, as I mentioned, next week. Vasil will join me then, and then we'll actually open some VI editors and do some coding, because Vasil is actually using VI, fun fact. And if you want to get notified, what do you need to do then, Didrik?
Oh, this is my gig. I need to subscribe. Very good. Thanks for listening in. I will think for it now. See you in the next one.